Greetings and welcome to another edition of Radical Grace Radio.
I'm Pastor Gary Held.
And my name is Matthew Pancake, and this is episode 822. Been doing this for a while, but turns out that it's important because as much as like when we started at the beginning of doing the show, Radical Grace Radio,
right?
Lately talking about things like thinking with the mind of Christ.
Yes.
Way back when, I had this thing where I wanted to, because the law and gospel distinction was something that got me. I was like, wow, that's really something. I thought that, yep, if the rest of Christianity, the rest of Christians could hear this distinction, that it might improve their Christian walk. And here it is all these years later, and it's not that we haven't gotten through to people, but there are a lot of people still to get through.
Yeah. And I'm gonna not really. I'm not splitting hairs. I just think that instead of talking about him, because here's the thing: is that I know what you meant, but the listener might think, well, I think I know what he means too when he says improve your Christian walk. Probably not, because there's a certain mindset that says improving your Christian walk means you start to shape up and you start to just care about spiritual things, and you exhibit more piety, or is the best way of thinking about it. And that's not what you mean at all. I know it's not. Is that what you mean by improving your Christian walk is being set free, like setting people free. That's a big deal. And that's what we hope that this show has been able to do over the course of several years now, and however long God wants it to continue. So setting people free. That's a great way.
And from time to time, we run into people that freedom is, I guess, kind of scary, and they just as soon live under the law as live in the freedom of Christ.
Well, I give them this much in their defense. They're told that your freedom is not something that you can really take for granted. Your freedom is something that, you get a little bit of freedom as long as you're doing the right things. I mean, people get told an awful lot of things in their churches. And I don't know that there's very many churches that emphasize, hey, it's for freedom that Christ set you free. So quit sweating everything. They want you to do the exact opposite. Please be more concerned about every little thing, because it all goes toward or against your holiness. And man, you got to have your aggregate holiness improving. So,
well, 40% of the angels, and I guess maybe because the population of the earth just keeps getting bigger, I guess it could be like 60% of angels are basically bean counters.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, they're counting every bean counts as a sin. It goes into the pile over here.
It could be. I mean,
now the thing about it is if I could think of that, I'm sure that somebody illustrating a sermon somewhere thought of that. So
that may be true. I'm just saying that the emphasis on improvement is not that you get to be, working harder to improve yourself better, but that if you're being set free, the status of a free person as opposed to an enslaved person, that's already a pretty big improvement. That's what I would say.
Right. Okay, so we're not enslaved to the law, but we're sometimes enslaved to news because, boy, I'll tell you what, there's plenty of it and there's plenty of garbage. And so I spend a lot of time. I'm actually spending more than just like a few hours before we do the show anymore. I actually spend a lot of the week looking for something and looking to see what's really going on. And because it's not getting better. The news is it's something. So I'm starting where I used to sort of joke about how bad the news roll is. I'm starting to think that there's kind of an important thing that's got to be done here. So let's do the Christian News Roll. So Chick-fil-A, that's a fast food chain known for being closed on Sundays, and also they follow Christian values, or at least the way they say it. They're facing criticism over having a problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this has become a bit of a buzzword for, Christians and people who are sort of anti-left. DEI, they call it. The company's website emphasizes care and being a faithful steward as part of its DEI campaign. Some conservatives, though, such as Todd Starnes and Justin Dean, have criticized Chick-fil-A's DEI efforts, linking them to being woke and a potential risk to the company's success. Concerns for Chick-fil-A's commitment to conservative Christian values, I love listening to all those distinctions on values, were raised by missionary Spencer Smith after Chick-fil-A and Thibodeau, I think that's how that's pronounced, praised an employee named Tavian. Now, if you're watching the video version, I put up a photo of the person. Suffice it to say that the photo is of a male dressed in makeup and striking a feminine pose. CEO Dan Cathy has taken a more tempered approach to social issues as the company expanded into more liberal markets. Conservative leaders have criticized businesses and leaders for modifying their positions on same-sex marriage, accusing them of being cowards and attempting to redefine America. What does all this mean? Now the right is interested in eating their own. So, there's a couple of things I could say about that, but we'll wait until we come back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the number 4 story is that more than 4,000 people participated in a baptism event at Pirates Cove in California. The group gathering, known as Baptize SoCal, right? It's Baptize Southern California, was organized by Oceans Church and was said to have, quote, marked both the gift of eternal life and the 50th anniversary of the historic Jesus movement. Touted as the most significant mass baptism in history, it drew attendees from over 280 churches that witnessed 4,166 individuals declare their new life in Christ. Reports describe the atmosphere as, quote, electric, with attendees praising God and rejoicing in their kingdom family. And now this significant event, combined with some other recent successes such as the success of the movie Jesus Revolution, which depicts the people that were involved in the Jesus movement, and now the baptisms at Pirates Cove, all that serves as a reminder of the spiritual revival that was then taking place in America. So kind of a historic time in America's religious history.
Mm-hmm. So here's something else that I guess is a little bit historic. Although it interests me because people do these things from time to time, and I'm not sure what they thought they were accomplishing. But a church in Pennsylvania is nearing the completion of a cross that stands 108 feet high on its property, with a sizable Christian symbol expected to be finished this month. It's June, by the way. For context, the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro is 98 feet tall. Of course, it's way up on a mountain, so it tends to step on you. Hilltop Baptist Church in Indiana, Pennsylvania, I'll talk about that in a second, just north of Pittsburgh, is building the large cross with volunteer help and hopes it will serve as a beacon for evangelism and outreach. In comments sent to the Christian Post, this is what they did, Hilltop Baptist Church pastor Jack Lucas, said his congregation is building the cross to share the hope of Jesus Christ and to remind folks that God loves us. The pastor said funding for the project has come through donations by the congregation. The church expects to finish construction on the massive cross by Father's Day, June 18th. Lucas hopes the large cross will become a quiet place of spiritual contemplation where people can come, sit, and pray. An independent Baptist congregation that recently opened a satellite location in Blairsville, Hilltop Church, describes itself as Bible-believing church that works hard to meet the needs of every age group. Now, you see, I checked because that sounded weird. Indiana, Pennsylvania. Sounds like New York, California. But it turns out that that's a real county. It's Indiana County. And the city that's the center of that is Indiana, Pennsylvania. So it turns out that it's real. They only have 14,000 people living there. 14,044.
Not a lot for a whole county.
Yeah. So that's going to be a big, lonely cross unless people start coming from around.
It's a quiet place for people to come and meditate.
It's a quiet place.
That's because there ain't nobody around. But anyway, the number 2 story is in response to a wave of claims related to childhood sexual abuse, 2 Roman Catholic dioceses in California, namely the Santa Rosa and the Oakland Diocese, have filed for bankruptcy protection.
That's big news.
Since a 2019 state law temporarily lifted the statute of limitations on civil lawsuits against institutions in enabling abuse, plaintiffs have filed more than 3,000 cases. That's
Right.
a lot of cases. The Diocese of Santa Rosa, which estimates its assets to be between $10 and $50 million, has already paid out $35 million in settlements after receiving over 200 lawsuits. The Diocese of Oakland has also faced approximately 330 lawsuits, and they took their measures to stabilize finances. And the diocese has filed for bankruptcy, they say, to ensure fairness and compassion for abuse survivors. However, there are concerns, as reports indicate, that 1/3 of California's 12 dioceses have already declared bankruptcy or are considering it. So, advocacy groups for the abused, such as the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, the acronym they go by is SNAP. That group, advocacy group, calls for a thorough examination of these bankruptcies and a comprehensive report on the lawsuits by the Attorney General of California. So, ongoing drama in California.
Yeah, those are 2 very large dioceses. You wouldn't have expected them to file bankruptcy, but they did. So, the number 1 story is a bit of a primer on North Korea and how they treat Christians. Recently released report by the U.S. State Department sheds light on the alarming state of religious persecution in North Korea. According to the report, Christians in the country face the death penalty for possessing a Bible. At the same time, their family members, including children, are sentenced to life in prison. The State Department further estimates that around 70,000 Christians are currently incarcerated in North Korea, enduring harsh conditions and physical mistreatment. We'll find out about that in a second. The report highlights that 90% of documented human rights abuses against Christians and shamanism can be attributed to the Ministry of State Security. The North Korean government subjects individuals who engage in religious practice or religious rituals. If they possess religious items or associate with religious individuals, to severe persecution. Punishments range from arrest and detention to torture, forced labor, deportation, and even death.
Can I take the deportation option, please?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice, right?
Deport from.
Right. Accounts from a nonprofit organization called Korea Future reveal the extent of the persecution. Christian women interviewed reported rampant abuse of religious freedoms, including forced labor, sexual violence, arbitrary detention, torture, and deportation. We talked about that in a second ago. Korea Future found educational materials in North Korea to be anti-religion, depicting Christian missionaries as perpetrators of heinous crimes such as rape, organ harvesting, and murder. Sounds a little bit like some projection going on there. While North Korea's constitution ostensibly guarantees religious freedom, right, the State Department report argues that the churches constructed in Pyongyang serve as mere showpieces for foreigners. I've seen those. They actually have mannequins inside them so that, they don't let you look in, but it looks like there's people inside. Discrimination also extends to followers of shamanism, with potential sentences ranging from forced labor to re-education facilities. We've heard that one said before. The report concludes that the North Korean government's campaign to eradicate Christianity has been chillingly effective, utilizing the Ministry of State Security, networks of informants, political prison camps, executions, and an oppressive educational and organizational system. According to Open Doors USA's World Watch List, North Korea consistently ranks as the worst country for Christian persecution. And that is this week's Christian News Roll. Would you like North Korea's at the top? Would you like the rest of the top 10 list?
Yes, please, because I want the listeners to understand that you got to be pretty bad to be worse than, well, the remainder of these in the list. Go ahead,
Yeah.
give them some.
Somalia,
Yeah.
Yemen, Eritrea, Libya, Nigeria, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, which is at 9. They used to be number 1. Last year they were number 1. And Sudan. These are like you've heard of all these before, and North Korea like tops all of them. 70,000 incarcerated. I skipped this one bit because I just wanted to like save it. Shockingly, at one point, even a 2-year-old child was given a life sentence in a political prison camp after their parents were caught with a Bible. So the child gets to go to prison. I wonder how that even works.
Who knows? Who knows?
Verbal abuse, malnutrition, and then being fed contaminated food. Tied up in uncomfortable, stress positions, beatings. This is what the reports are coming out, because people, they defect from North Korea. They managed to make it out, and the reports are atrocious. And it's just, I don't even know what to say about it. Because I just said everything that I could say. 70,000 Christians incarcerated. Are they like in competition with China? Is that what it is?
Well, it sounds like China's getting soundly beaten on this one.
Yeah,
so.
Well, they didn't even make the top 10 list. Usually that's a good point. Usually we report on what goes on in China, and a lot of the time you don't hear much about North Korea. But then there's a reason why. They don't let people out.
Yeah.
Although it would be nice to have that deportation thing, right? But maybe they don't do that as often because people get out and then they tell everyone what's going on. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that getting back to the Roman Catholic diocese that are in California and this advocacy network group for the survivors of sexual abuse, they're saying, oh, you're going to file bankruptcy protection. Okay. But they're calling for this to be thoroughly examined and, so what exactly is going on? Where's the money going to be? Where's the money going to be? And, all these things. I think what they're afraid of is that the resources are going to get hidden or shuffled around someplace. Right. Whereas, now I don't know that you can take the diocese at face value when they say that what they want is they want to maintain a certain amount of solvency to ensure that, well, all these people who have been abused are going to be able to receive some kind of compensation. That's what they sound like they're saying, is that it's about making sure that they're going to have some protection too. So I don't know, probably a little bit of both.
It was just a big deal. It actually popped up at the last minute this morning. And I thought, those are pretty. I mean, look at the $30 to $50 million in assets in Santa Rosa alone.
Not anymore.
Well, not after paying 30. Well, I'm going to assume that 35 million is over and above the 50 million, if that's the maximum. And they're
that
still
was
looking
from
at
200 lawsuits, though, right?
Yeah,
that was from 200.
That's from
and now
200.
They just had 3,000 filed against them.
Yeah. So let's see if this adds up. 200 plus 330. Yep, that's 3,000. No, it isn't. They've got a long way to go. Long way to go on this one.
So I'm going to be.
So is this a competition? Like, you guys are building a giant cross down there at Trinity Lutheran, aren't you?
No, we're not. But I'll tell you what. Now I'm inspired. We'll start next week. But no. So let me. Boy, I don't know what to say about this because I want to take a look at this in a serious manner, and yet I don't want to break the 8th commandment. I don't know these people. I want to put a good construction on what they're doing. So my good construction is going to be that perhaps, at least in part, they think a cross will will have an effect of making people aware that, the cross of Jesus Christ has some role to play in their lives too.
Right.
Maybe that's it. But there's also just the fact that if you're the church that erected the world's tallest cross, that sounds an awful lot like one motivation. Partly could be bragging rights. There's nobody else who's got
I don't
a
know that it's
taller.
the tallest one in the world, but
Well, that's what it sounds like.
they're very specific. Like, see, what I did is I wanted context. So what I did is I looked up, because I knew that, I didn't know how tall the statue in Rio de Janeiro is. Turns out it's 98 feet tall.
And this is 10 feet taller.
And yeah, so I don't know if that's what their comparison point is. There might be taller crosses for all I know.
Maybe they're going for the tallest cross in North America, or maybe the tallest cross in the state of Pennsylvania.
They did make a big deal out of they did this. It's on our property.
That's right.
So it's not on public property or any of that stuff. So that like the atheists can come along and complain, right? So maybe they're wondering if the atheists will come along and go, well, you can see it from public property or something like that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Too bad. You could see it from public property. Maybe, I shouldn't even think that, because like I said earlier, if I can think of it, someone else can, and someone else who wants to do that will think of it. So I should probably not do that. My dad used to call stuff like that famous last words. Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think of this? So I looked it up, and the previous record for the number of people baptized in a single day was 3,000. You know where that's recorded?
Well, I don't know if that is actually the previous record, but I know exactly where you're going. That's from the book of Acts.
4,166. Now, of course, it being Southern California, where it took place. It took place in the beaches there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that, if you look up pictures of it, you see a lot of people, it's just, this beach is just covered with people. And here's the thing is, in order to arrive at a number, you'd have to have somebody like down there, like for one thing, to do 4,000, there's got to be more than one baptism going on at once.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And there's got to be people like keeping tabs of who got baptized. And I guess they're keeping records. Which is a good thing, because that way people can point to that and say, "Yep, that's when I was baptized." This would be a good time to bring that up. That's one good thing that comes out of it.
Part of me wants to say this is a celebratory event because, well, if these baptisms were being done for people, using the words, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Like you say, they're probably at the beach, so there's water there. So then that would make it, in those terms, a valid baptism. And well, then why not celebrate that? Partly is the carnival affair almost of, we're all here. It's a great big baptism party. It's almost like a spectacle. And I'm saying that I think that kind of takes away from it, but not that it would necessarily have to, but it also, I think, in part depends on what were these people instructed about baptism prior to getting baptized, or were they given any instruction at all?
Right.
There's a few things that you can say. I have some misgivings here about this. Ordinarily, this would be a very wonderful thing to hear about people being baptized. But under the circumstances, you are making me question some of the ways that you did it. And so I guess I would want to know.
Well, it doesn't make good headlines if it were to say 4,166 people were catechized.
No, that would not.
That wouldn't make a good headline, because people would be, what? What does that even mean? Catechized? Is that like going to the doctor to have a procedure done?
Yeah,
What?
it's like immunized, only different. So
Exactly. Okay, so the first thing that I did when I saw this, see, did you ever see? And people can look this up. There was a video that went around for a while there, and it was of Joel Cathy. He's the founder of Chick-fil-A. He's
okay,
he's getting up there in years. So this was like several years ago. He was on stage with Lecrae. He's a Christian rapper, and he had a shoe brush with him. So he told this story about being at a church and someone was moved about the problem of racism so much that they took a shoe brush and they gave a shoe shine to every black person that was there. It was a white guy doing it. So he had
okay,
the brush there. So he went over and he brushed. And the thing is, eventually he makes the point that Jesus washed the feet of his disciples.
right,
And it's a humbling moment. And that, this is similar to that. And that was what was going on. And people, of course, it was 2016, 2017, something like that. They, of course, cut the video and made it seem like he was sort of being idiotic and woke. And that actually rose up again with this. It frequently happens. They bring up a video from the past and they use this as like a further way of claiming that, well, they've gone woke. I mean, it started there and now look where they are. So the first thing that I did when I heard this was I ordered me some Chick-fil-A. I haven't had Chick-fil-A in years. Only because it's like way down the street from me. So it's not like I can just go there. But it dawned on me that, oh, well, Uber Eats, they'll bring it to me. Because I think this is a little bit of a nothing burger.
Oh, you mean the story?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
because, come on.
It's one guy. I mean, it's one guy who has a problem because somebody else is being is an employee that is receiving some praise or recognition, I would assume, for being a good employee. So,
Right.
And this missionary who made him a missionary, that's the next question. Spencer Smith, never heard of him.
Yeah, he's I don't even want to go into it because
wants to argue with Chick-fil-A that, well, this is starting to look suspicious if you have, first of all, that you have such an employee. Second of all, that then you would, whether he's a good employee in some terms or not, that you'd give him praise. Obviously, though, he's doing something that is immoral because he's not dressed the way a man should be dressed. And so, okay, I get it. I get it. You don't think that this is an appropriate way to live. On the other hand, does the Chick-fil-A corporation, do they have a policy where you can get hired by them, and as long as you do your job according to their specifications?
Speaking of job, because here's where I would jump in. I would say, look, he says, this guy, this Tavian, he says his favorite position is to work on the drive-through bagging, making sure that your food is bagged fast and accurately. Okay, now, how many times have you been through the drive-through and you didn't get what it was you ordered? If he's good at it, I don't care if he's wearing a nose ring. He's doing a good job. And if he's really doing a good enough job to be praised for that, because that's what it says there's a picture, but it doesn't say we're praising him for like looking like this. So the deal is that he apparently does that job well.
Well, I think the idea that Spencer Smith would have is don't praise him or give him kudos for anything because you don't like something about the guy. Well, okay.
Okay, so you don't like how he looks.
Maybe he's got, maybe in this case, I don't know anything about this employee. Maybe the employee is one of these ones insisting on other pronouns. I don't know. I don't know anything about the story. I just know that this seems like now we're going to, like you said, now the Christian far right is turning on its own, because it used to be Chick-fil-A was the darlings of the whole, right wing, we're taking America back kind of, if you want a fast food meal and you had a choice, Chick-fil-A, man, as long as it's not on a Sunday. Boy, be hungry any other day of the week, but not on a Sunday. but you can get your Chick-fil-A, and then, well, I suppose they would argue you're supporting something that's good and you ought to support it. Well, okay. So do they make the same chicken sandwich that they always made? Probably.
They're still closed on Sunday. Like, here's the thing is, like, they've been number one so many times that it makes you wonder if they said, well, it's just open on Sunday, because they're leaving a lot of money on the table by not being open on Sunday.
Right.
I mean, they probably know that, but the conviction throughout the entire company. I mean, they've never been able to overthrow the idea. Nobody would even say it. They would say, like, oh, we should be open on Sunday. They won't do it. What are we going to talk about on the other side of the break?
I want to circle back to something that we talked about a couple of not this last time, but the time before. We were talking about God's living water. You know, this idea that water and living water is a strong metaphor, and it may even be more than simply a metaphor, but that's really what it is throughout Scripture. They talk about the power of the Holy Spirit and the way that God moves us and refreshes us. And it is the theme this year of our Vacation Bible School here at Trinity. And so, well, I just wanted to look at another aspect of that, because we talked before about water from the rock, right? That when the children of Israel were in the desert and they were crying out and, lamenting, we don't have any water, give us water, we need water to drink. And then Moses causes the rock to gush forth water. And so that's how they were preserved. So this time we're going to talk about Naaman. Not going to talk about the rock anymore. Now we're going to talk about the water associated with a certain character named Naaman. He appears in 2 Kings chapter 5. So maybe everybody can be turning to that, and we'll talk about that.
Getting ready. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with more Radical Grace Radio in just a moment. And welcome back to Radical Grace Radio. You know, the story of Naaman was one of those stories that came up in like catechesis between you and me whenever I first came to the Risen Savior Lutheran Church. Should I explain catechesis before?
Yeah, you can use the word, but it won't hurt.
I was being taught as adult instruction, that kind of thing, and I had heard the story before. I may have even I did obviously read the story, but I hadn't remembered it. And you had a whole angle, it was like a baptism angle and stuff like that. But I get the impression that that's not strictly where we're going today.
Well, we're going to start there. We're going to talk about what these are all things with this Vacation Bible School that are related or touch on water, how water is communicating to us God's living water. And so this is what we're going to talk about today. And I invited the listeners earlier to turn to 2 Kings chapter 5. That's where the story is, and that's what we're going to begin reading. And we'll I'll do a little color commentary. Ooh, right.
That'll be little? Good.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Yeah. So why don't you start at chapter 5, verse 1, and how about if you read through, just read through, let's take a little bites at first. So 1 through 3.
1 through 3, okay. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy."
Okay, so So you got this guy, his name is Naaman, and he's an officer in the army. In fact, very high ranking, it would appear. So you can might as well think of him as a general or something like that. Highly regarded because he's had some real success on the battlefield. So he's a force to be reckoned with. And the Lord, it says the Lord had given victory to Aram. So maybe it's not all that much because he's a great general, but he also has been getting some blessing in this case from the Lord. Who is obviously these are not Jewish people, by the way. Good to know. Good to know as we unfold this. And so you've got the raiding parties that go out, and they're basically going to capture people. They're going to capture especially livestock. That's always a nice thing. Now your cattle are my cattle, and your herds are my herds. But in this case, they're also taking people. Now I'm sure that they're not taking people who are actively fighting them. There's a reason why it's warfare. But this young girl, she's just going to be one of the ones who's captured. And so sometimes you take the captives with you because, well, they can serve a purpose. In this case, it's like getting a free slave you didn't have to pay for. So that doesn't, and don't just be put off by that, because it doesn't necessarily mean that this in this case, being a slave was being abused. In fact, there's a little reason to think that maybe quite the opposite, that because when this young girl is captured and she becomes a servant or a slave, if you will, either way, she's put into the service of Naaman's wife. So Naaman's wife has her own personal servant girl, but this girl is an Israelite. Okay, Naaman and his wife, they're not Jewish, but this girl is an Israelite. And so she says to her mistress, if only, or if would that my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria. Basically she's saying he's got a solution for this problem. And of course, in the ancient, I don't think that it's exactly, I don't know whether leprosy, strictly speaking, is curable now, even today. I do believe that it's certainly treatable. But back in the ancient day, certainly couldn't cure it, probably couldn't treat it, didn't know what to do. It's a problem, by the way, that's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better on its own. So he's got a reason to be worried for his future, right? And so, but you might wonder, why would this young girl, if she's been captured and feels like taken away, ripped out of her homeland, why is she doing this? Why is she giving him,
why is she making a suggestion?
Why is she giving him some help? I don't know. We'd have to speculate. Maybe it does occur to me that if you're an ordinary, say, peasant girl in Israel, and now it's probably a traumatic event, being ripped away from your family and your culture and taken to another strange place. But what do you want to bet that Naaman and his wife live in pretty good digs, right?
Yeah.
And they have not just a comfortable home, but they have a better than average lifestyle. So maybe if you're serving in that kind of situation, you think, yeah, this isn't so bad. Right?
It's also possible that she was a servant girl to begin with.
It's possible that too.
Yeah.
So anyway, but she makes the suggestion, and Naaman apparently thinks that, well, if there's a chance, if there's a glimmer of a chance, of course he can't just decide to go on his own. He has to go to the king, that's his master, and relay to him what the girl from Israel had told him, and to get, among other things, the king's permission. So, which he gets. The king of Aram or Syria says, yeah, sure, by all means, go. So why don't you pick that up and pick up at 4 and well, let's go to the end of 7. That would be fine.
Okay. Beginning with verse 4. So Naaman went in and told his Lord, thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, am I God, to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking to quarrel with me.
Right. They've
had
a
little
history.
bit like he thinks it's like, okay, so they've been having skirmishes and raids. He wants to escalate the full-on war.
It certainly looks that way, that he's suspicious. And well, this probably is why the letter didn't have the intended effect, I guess, but probably the reason why the king says, I give you permission, if you can get a cure or a fix for this problem, because he's a highly regarded general, you kind of want to keep him around. So, by all means you go, and I'll even write a letter for you. And well, what's the purpose of a letter? Well, all I can think of is that you take the letter, and it's a kind of a statement, if anybody stops you and, wants to know, what are you doing? You show them the letter. That is a statement of intent, kind of. What it means is that I am not sending this guy out to, start war with you. The intentions are that he wants to be cured of leprosy. So it's an explanation. Now, of course, Naaman takes this to the king of Israel. He goes to where, the king of Israel is, and the king of Israel says, look what he's trying to ask me to do. And of course, the idea is if I refuse, well, I have to it's not even a refusal. If I can't do it, then what
happens?
Yeah, then what happens?
Right.
Then he made a request. I didn't do it, and does that escalate things? But he tears his robes. It's a kind of a dramatic moment, I guess. And we kind of skipped over the gold and the silver and the sets of clothing, changes of clothing. Usually this is understood to be Naaman's taking this with him, either as a kind of a bribe or maybe payment for services rendered. If he does get cured, he's got to have something with him. And this looks like it's a valuable stuff. So okay. He's going to go, and he's going to go to, apparently he's going to go to Jerusalem first, where the king is. And that's, he wouldn't know where to find the prophet anyway, although he might have started by saying, I should probably start in Samaria, since it is the prophet in Samaria. And, but he doesn't. He goes, he gives the letter to the king, and, he's the guy, the letter to the king has hit its mark, and he's going a little bit crazy. But Elisha, the man of God, the prophet in this case, hears about this. He hears about the king having this day. And so why don't we pick up at verse 8 and go to the end of verse 10.
Okay. Beginning with 8. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, then he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elijah's house. And Elijah sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean.
Okay, so here's a picture, up to probably not a fancy house. I mean, the prophet is, well, he's a prophet. He's not a millionaire. He's just got he's got a house, And so up right in front of the house, pulls all the horses and the chariots and the whole entourage, and it's
And
drawing,
bags shaking full of gold.
it's drawing attention from the neighbors,
Right.
Probably unwelcome attention. Anyway, yeah, he's out there, and now, what would you imagine that somebody who's a highly regarded officer in the Syrian army, what kind of reception do you think he would get back home if he just showed up at somebody's house?
They would be like, "Oh, look who's here." And they would be, polishing up and killing the fatted calf, so to speak. Rolling out the red carpet.
Sit down, make yourself at home.
Right. And then whenever he shows up, they would be outside, sort of on their knees, bowing to him, and so forth and so on. Yeah, great man.
He's got a history of expecting this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, how do you think it strikes him when Elisha the prophet doesn't even come to the door himself? He sends a messenger out to talk to him. This is
knocking on the door, going, and yes, I can just see it. It's like, said, Naaman is here. He says, oh, okay. Disappears for a second. Messenger comes back and tells him exactly what he said there, and then closes the door. It's like, what? This is strange. This is not supposed to work at all.
And what was he told to do?
Go to the Jordan.
Right.
Go to the River Jordan.
There.
Dunk yourself in 7 times.
Wash yourself 7 times. And the promise is that your flesh is going to be restored and you'll be cleansed of the leprosy. So that sounds like, well, he's going to get the healing he came for. That's what he wanted. But it says in verse 11 that Naaman doesn't exactly feel like he's been treated well. So why don't you pick up at 11 now and read through the end of 12.
Okay. But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all of the waters in Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. Okay,
so he's really ticked off. He went away angry. First of all, he didn't even get received the way he's used to being received at the door. He gets I'm dealing with a messenger flunky, and I'm not used to that. And then he gets told what he's got to do, and he's thinking, I am not getting the kind of personal attention I was looking for, because in his mind, Elisha was going to come out and right there, and lay his hands over and wave his hands and pray and call on the name of the Lord and well, like I say, give him the personal attention he's sort of used to. Instead, he's getting this, well, go wash 7 times in the Jordan, and you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're going to be restored. Well, he's mad about it. First of all, because this to him sounds like, yeah, what are you trying to say about the Jordan River? Which, by the way, for those that are listening, you may know, you may not know. I'll tell you that the Jordan River in a lot of places is pretty shallow. It's not, you got to kind of be selective where you go in order to be able to really dip yourself in, because there's some places where it isn't even going to come up waist high, and you might have a little bit of a challenge. But the other thing too is that it's not necessarily a very pretty river. It isn't always very clean. It's, and this guy's thinking about the really nice, Kodak moment rivers that they got back home, Abana and Pharpar, these rivers that run through Damascus, an important city with important, beautiful rivers running through them. And if it's going to come down to just washing in a river, well, why wouldn't I be better off just having stayed home and washed in one of those? And so he's tacked off. So he goes storming off and thank God for, in this case, Naaman should thank God that he's got one of his own servants there with him who talks some sense into the guy. Mm-hmm. So why don't you pick up at 13 and, well, read through the end of 14. We're just doing it 2 little verses at a time, but that's how it is.
Okay. Starting with 13. But his servants came near and said to him, My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? He has actually said to you, Wash and be clean. So he went down and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored, like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean.
Okay, so my translation that I'm looking at reads a little differently. The servant says to him, My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, in other words, if some great thing, some hard thing, like, okay, I can give you your healing, but you're going to have to go on this really difficult quest and, make this monumental sacrifice.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I need some unicorn tears.
Yeah. Something like that, or, the feathers of the phoenix or something, whatever it has to be. If you'd been told that you had to go on a quest to do something heroic or difficult, okay, then you would have just sort of said, that's what I got to do. And you would have gone off and given it a shot. And instead, look at this. He says, wash and be cleansed. So wouldn't you want to at least try? I mean, this is not a bad piece of advice. So, okay. So you can imagine Naaman kind of going, okay, I brought all these people here. They're all wondering why we're here. They're all wondering, if we turn around and go home, then everybody's going to say that I, let them down or whatever. So, okay, I guess I'll wash in the Jordan, even though I don't think it's that great of a river, but fine. And he does. And he is, well, I think probably to his own surprise, cleansed, although it shouldn't have been a surprise. That is exactly what the prophet had said would happen. So now I'm going to read this part. Now they come back in verse 15, and then Naaman and all his attendants, everybody in this big entourage, they went back to the man of God and stood before him and said, this is Naaman's confession now. Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So, he's had his eyes opened. This is a big deal because, well, he's just seen and experienced a miracle. So then he says, so please accept a gift from your servant. Remember all that silver and talents of silver and gold and stuff? Yeah, well, the prophet, now we're going to skip part of this, but the prophet Naaman, the prophet Elisha, refuses to accept it. And so an interesting thing, after he refuses it, Naaman has his own request. If we have time, we'll get back to it. But then they have to, well, then he's got to go back home, and he knows he does. So he explains that he basically says, when my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, meaning I'm in this pagan temple. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. He's saying it's kind of part of my job description to let the old king hang on my arm. But I still want to be taken seriously, that I believe in the God of Israel now. Whatever's in that temple back home, that doesn't compare at all to the God he's just had an encounter with. And so basically he gets told by the prophet, go in peace, and he leaves. And I'm going to skip part of this later on, but he has this interesting experience that he goes back, and now he's going to be, it doesn't tell us really what his reception was when he got back home, but you can infer that, people would have known if they knew about his problem and they see him coming back healed, they're gonna notice, right? And they're gonna really know that something peculiar happened when he was away in Israel, or Samaria in this case. So it's an interesting thing. Now, here's what I want to talk about, because there's a lot of things you can mention about, like I say, the the request he made, and also the fact that I always like to tell people, end the story with, who's his best friend, or who's going to be his best friend now when he gets back to home, basically.
Oh, I'd say he'd be looking for that little servant girl.
Yeah, because she's the only one who knows what he knows now to be true. She's the only other one who really knows that this God of Israel, he's the real deal. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things about how this might be considered connected to, or it is God's living water. But let's talk about the connection that a lot of times the Lutheran would make would be to baptism. Okay, not that this is a baptism. Nobody says this was him being baptized. At most, I think you could do this. You could say, sometimes we talk about type and antitype. So, if Paul says this about Adam, he says he's a type of Christ. And so, well, the antitype, the corresponding thing that he's like is Christ. And Hebrews does the same thing when it says that, Jesus goes and ministers in the heavenly temple. And you get the impression that the earthly one is only a type of what's a greater reality. So maybe this really does point to the greater reality that is baptism. But let me ask you this. How much faith did Naaman have before he went down into the water? Before he went down?
I got the impression that he didn't believe it was going to do anything for him.
I have the impression too. In fact, he's complaining before, if I'm just going to wash in water, why don't I do the rivers back in Damascus? However, if he had taken his own advice and washed in the waters of Damascus, what would have happened?
Nothing.
Right. Nothing would have happened because the promise that God made through the prophet was attached to washing in the Jordan. And that's exactly how we look at it too. The Jordan River is not the intrinsic nature of the water that makes it able to do these things. It's because God has attached a promise to it. And God is faithful to his promises. And somebody else might say, well, it's because he was obedient. There's always somebody who wants to find a loophole that says that this is really still about obedience. If he hadn't been obedient to the command, he wouldn't have gotten his help. That's a way to think about it, but not the right way. There's a lot of things that when God talks about, when Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I with them. And most Baptists and other folks would agree. Yeah, that's true. Well, does that mean that you being there causes him to be there? Or is it the fact that if you want to be where Jesus is, you need to seek out and be where those are gathered in his name? So it's not really your doing it that makes anything happen. And it's the same thing with this, is that it's not really that he did what God told him to do, and that was a condition that God said, because you did what I told you to do, now you get your healing. So it's like, no, God attached it to the water. And the water, even though it's ordinary water, delivers what God said it would deliver.
And besides which, he went seeking a prophet. He went seeking a healing.
He found more than that. He found a God.
Yeah, he just didn't like what he was told to do. And when someone said, if it had been anything better, you would have done that.
Right.
Yeah, okay. You're right. I'm being dumb. So he goes and he does it. But the thing is you're right. There was no promise attached to it. Nothing would have happened. Thanks for listening to Radical Grace Radio today, and may God bless you. The show's email address is lutherandifference@gmail.com. Our Twitter handle is @RadicalGrace, and our website is radicalgraceradio.com, where you can support us through PayPal. Visit us on Facebook and download one of our mobile apps for iOS and Android. Thank you for listening to Radical Grace Radio, and may God bless your day.